Thank you for tuning in to Bread in Captivity. Today we'll be breaking down the story of Aisha Frazier and Lance Mason. This story will include sensitive topics like violence and domestic abuse. Viewer discretion is advised. From the outside looking in, Aisha Frazier and Lance Mason were sort of an idyllic couple living a perfect life. They lived in Shaker Heights, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, and it's a really affluent neighborhood where a lot of prominent people come from. Aisha was a single child. She was adored by her family. She went to Shaker Heights High, graduated with honors, went on to get a bachelor's degree, joined a prestigious sorority, Delta Sigma Theta, and then went on to lock down a master's degree. Both of her degrees were in education. Lance Mason was sort of the golden boy of his family. He became a lawyer and then eventually became a judge in Shaker Heights, and the two got married in 2005. In 2008, they had their first child, and in 2010, their second. Audrey, who was their first child, was born with a condition called autism and another condition called Down syndrome. These conditions manifest in developmental delays, learning disabilities, and sometimes medical abnormalities. In Audrey's case, she had all of these. She was born with a hole in her heart, and they knew that the doctors told her family that she was going to need surgery in order to close it up. Her parents were heartbroken by the news, of course, but they were also really determined to give Audrey the best possible life that they could. So they set out to make Audrey's chocolate shop. This was sort of the third love child of Lance and Aisha. Neither of them were chefs by trade or like technically trained or anything like that, but Lance was really into cooking shows, and one day in 2012, he saw one about making chocolate. This was early 2012. He saw the episode and he thought, you know what? I'm going to give it a shot. So he set out to make chocolate and just worked for weeks and weeks and weeks to perfect a recipe. He would bring samples of his good to work and hand it out to like people in the office, bailiffs, prosecutors, other judges, what have you, to sample it and give him feedback. They would let him know what they liked, what they didn't like, and he would take their feedback, fix what he wanted to fix, and come back and present something new. People went from hesitantly accepting this chocolate to just straight up looking forward to it because his chocolates became so good. On the flip side, Aisha was building an online presence for them. She had experience in IT, so she was creating a website to sell the chocolates, and soon they were getting orders upon orders and constantly selling out of their stock. The couple even bought a deep freezer to put in the living room to store the chocolate because they were in such high demand. Later that year in September, they were approached by a market that comes to town every 4 months. This was called the Republic of Artists Holiday Market. Someone would put in the work of curating hard to find items and goods like the chocolates that Lance and Aisha were selling for their daughter, and so they invited them to come. It was short notice and the couple was like overwhelmed a little bit at first, but they put in the work and they got an order together and they went to the market and sold out. 500 pieces gone in less than a day. They went back 3 months later and they sold out triple what they did in the beginning. So how does this loving couple with a heartwarming story, every advantage you could possibly ask for, socially, loving parents, higher education, how did they become the topic of news in Shaker Heights for a violent scene, not once, but twice? So contrary to how Lance was presenting himself in the public as somebody who was the perfect man, the perfect husband, the perfect father, a judge, he was very different at home. He wanted to exercise a level of control over Aisha and their girls that went far beyond what could be considered just wanting to protect your family. He needed to know what they were doing at all times, and he also wanted to be the one that approved what they were doing at all times, who they were seeing, who their friends were. And Aisha was begging her husband, please get some therapy because your mental state is not tenable, and we're not going to make it if you don't seek help. And Lance never did. So fast forward to March 2014, and things have reached a boiling point that Aisha can no longer tolerate, and she files for separation from Lance. By now, he started bringing weapons into the home, like leading up to the separation. We're talking grenades, guns, swords, and thousands of rounds of ammo. He kept it in the house as a way to kind of show Aisha that I could use this at any time. So you have to do what I say. And she gathered up her courage and said enough is enough and separated from him. Aisha moved out of their home, got an apartment for herself and the girls, and her and Lance agreed to share custody. She would drop the girls off for Lance and he would drop the girls off for her. And this way they could give each other the space that's required when you're dealing with the separation to kind of figure out how things are going to go forward. The whole time they were separated, Lance was really trying to win Aisha back. He told her that he would go seek help, that he would go to church, he would go to therapy, whatever she wanted if she came home. But she wasn't ready yet because life with him had been a real nightmare. Later, so they got separated in March. Later in the beginning of August, Lance's aunt passes away. He asks Aisha to come with him and bring the girls to go to the funeral together. The couple had one car at the time, orange Saturn View, and they were sharing it. So Lance said he was going to pick them up, take them with him to the funeral, and then drop them off afterwards. And because, of the grief that he was experiencing at the time, Aisha agreed. So he picked the girls up in the morning. They went to the service, and around noon, they leave the service. They pile into the car. Lance is driving. Aisha's in the passenger side, and the girls are in the back. While they're driving, Lance is talking to Aisha about their relationship, and the conversation is getting kind of heated. He's insisting that the separation's gone on for a long time and he wants her back. He's asking her how she feels about this, and Aisha is not ready to have this conversation. And then he moves the conversation from there to talking about their girls. Lance doesn't trust Aisha. He doesn't believe that she's taking proper care of his kids when he's not around. He doesn't trust who she has around. He's very paranoid about any man in Aisha's life, and these are just coworkers and friends being around his girls. This is probably him just trying to exercise more control. I mean, they're separated and he still wants to tell her what to do. She has never given him cause to question the kind of mother that she is. Lance, on the other hand, has been erratic, abusive, and just all over the place for the entirety of their marriage. So this conversation is getting heated in the car, and remember, the girls are in the back seat. Audrey around this time is 7 years old and Ava is 4, and they're in the back seat in plain view and listening to their parents fighting, and the fighting escalating and escalating and escalating. And soon everything's about to go haywire. While they're in the car arguing with each other, just down the road, a random woman, is coming out of the A train, and she sees this burnt orange SUV, as she describes it, stopped in the road in sort of an unusual way. And when she looks through the front window, she can see that there are fists flying in the front of the car, and she immediately calls 911. She calls 911. A dispatcher picks up and she's trying to explain what she's seeing. She's on the road. She's on Van Aken. She describes the car and says that there's a fight going on inside and it looks really violent. A few minutes later at 12:14 p.m., Aisha calls the police, says that Lance has beaten her up and has run away with her kids. So while these two were in the car arguing with each other in full view of their kids, Lance resorted to violence, and with his left hand on the steering wheel, he was using his right hand to close fist punch his wife in the face repeatedly over 20 times. In addition to punching her in the face, he grabbed her by the back of the head and smashed her face repeatedly into the dashboard, breaking her nose, orbital bone, and other bones in her face. He even went so far in his rage and hatred that he bit his wife on her cheek, on her neck. It was violent and graphic and all in view of their girls sitting right behind them. While he's delivering this vicious beating, Aisha's doing everything that she can to get somebody's attention and try to get some help. Luckily, that woman saw her and called the police, even though Aisha was going to call the police herself a few minutes later. But she's also trying to grab the wheel. She's honking the horn, trying to get anybody's attention. And then she even tries to escape the car by opening the side door, opening the passenger door where she is, hoping that Lance is going to stop. When she does this, Lance goes from punching her and biting her to with his hand still on the wheel. And now they're going to come to like this crazy halt that draws the attention of that other woman, taking his wife's neck and pinning her against the passenger side window, trying to choke the life out of her. She manages to get out of this grip and jump out of the car and crawl away from the car as fast as she can. She's in survival mode. Lance goes from his seat in the driver's seat, slides over to the passenger seat, and follows Aisha out of the car. He gets on top of her and starts pounding her viciously again with closed fists, slamming her head into the floor, doing anything he can to cause her pain. When onlookers see what's going on and they start to sort of, converge on the scene, Lance jumps back in his car and speeds away with the girl still in there. And that's when Aisha calls 911 frantically. She's not worried about herself. She's not asking for an ambulance or anything. She wants someone to go and get her girls. The 911 dispatch operator that picks up kind of peppers her with all of these annoying questions in the beginning, like, where are you? Who's around you? Where are you hurt? When all she's really trying to get across to this guy is, someone has absconded with my kids. It is my husband. We are separated. He is violent. He just delivered a vicious beating, and now my 2 girls are in a car with him. She doesn't know what kind of mental state he's in, only that it's awful. And she does know that at home, he has all of that weaponry that he had amassed during their marriage, and she's freaking out. Onlookers come, gather up Aisha, put her in a Good Samaritan's car, and start to take her to the hospital while she's on the phone with 911. 911 tells her to pull over so that an officer can, find her and ask her some more questions. Why they wouldn't just take the description of the car and then find her kids right away, I don't know. But that was a frustrating call to listen to. When the police finally do catch up with Lance, they search his house, they find everything that's in there. He's being arrested and he has the nerve to ask, "How's my wife?" Fuck you. So Lance is booked. He has to resign as a judge. He is going to lose his law license, probably going to get disbarred. And for good reason. What he did to his wife was vicious. I have a hard time imagining someone delivering that kind of a beating to an absolute stranger, let alone the mother of your children. So Lance has to go before a judge. And there is a hearing coming up that boils everyone's blood. Because this couple is so well known in the community, a lot of outpouring of support has come in the form of letters to the judge explaining what they would like to see happen and what their idea of justice would be in this case. However, the letters are not in support of Aisha, the victim of this beating. The letters are mostly in support of Lance. They are coming from Congress people, lawyers, judges, clergymen, and these people know the severity of what he did. It's public record. There are pictures of Aisha's face that they have access to. They know in detail from the reports that he broke her orbital bone, her nose, that Aisha is undergoing facial reconstructive surgery because of what Lance did to her. And they still decided to write letters in support of this monster. It gets worse. Amongst the people who offered letters of support on behalf of Lance and not Aisha was Congresswoman Marcia L. Fudge. This one stings particularly because Marcia is also part of the sorority Delta Sigma Theta that Aisha is part of. This is a prominent sorority, and the bond of sisterhood that is described amongst the members of this is so deep and so long lasting. And I can't comprehend how a woman, and B, like someone who's part of that sisterhood, could write a letter on behalf of the abuser. It would, I mean, if you were in a sorority with Lance, you know, or like a fraternity with Lance, I can imagine that you would still have a hard time writing a letter on behalf of this dude, because you would know what he did and you would know what you would be defending. But to not even have that association with him, he's your coworker. They served on the bench together at some point. That's it. Why go out of your way to help rehabilitate this guy's image in public? She's not the only one, though. A judge named Joan Sinnenberg also wrote a letter. She was one of 4 judges who actually wrote letters, active judges, like on the bench judges who wrote letters in support of Lance. And Joan went so far as to say that she hopes that the judge looking at the case will consider not barring him from practicing law, like not revoking his law license. What? The bias that's shown in the judge, like amongst the judges in Shaker Heights, was really obvious. And I think that's part of the reason that all of them had to recuse themselves and another judge had to be brought in to preside over the case. Although whether or not this ended up doing what people who would have supported this hoped it did, I'm not sure, because we're about to get into the sentencing. For what he did to Aisha, in addition to losing his seat on the bench and having his law license revoked, he was also facing between 2 to 8 years for felonious assault. But because of all of the letters that came out and because of who he was, that got brought down to attempted felonious assault. I had to double check, but that is what happened. I don't know. That's exactly what they brought it down to. And instead of giving him the higher end of the sentence, which would have been 8 years, he got sentenced to 2 years, and then ended up serving 9 months. And during the 9 months that he was in there, while his wife was recovering from facial reconstructive surgery after being so viciously brutalized by him, he was writing a book, talking about how prison was getting his life back on track. Fuck you, Lance. When he was released from prison, Lance was told, do not go near Aisha. He still had visitation with his kids, and he got a new job courtesy of the mayor of that town, the mayor of Cleveland, or Shaker Heights, awarded this man, Lance Mason, who had served a tiny fraction of the possible sentence that he could have gotten, and he gave him a position in public service, the Minority Business Development Administrator. I'm not sure what the job did, like what the job entailed, but I know that it came with like $40,000 plus in pay plus perks. I understand that he has to support his family. So like coming out of prison, yes, you do need to find some sort of work to support your family, but it is a really tough pill to swallow when you see that the power that existed in Shaker Heights, in Cleveland, the power that existed there to be able to twist the arm of justice and give this man the lightest of sentences, the biggest of opportunities, and the most chance of avoiding recidivism. It's mind-boggling and it's frustrating. So when the judge was considering that sentence, by the way, I'm just going to add this, They said that they had a letter from Aisha talking about how she needed Lance out to support her financially. There's a little bit of controversy there. That letter does exist, but another letter exists where she wrote it to the judge and asked to have it not read in court because she was scared of Lance. And in that letter, she said she did not want him to come out because she feared for her life. Also, her needing him for financial support, I also find that really hard to buy. Like I said, Aisha grew up in Shaker Heights. She came from a family of influence. Her uncle, George C. Frazier, he was a power broker, a successful guy, a motivational speaker, and he loved his niece. So would she have struggled financially? I don't know. She also was a teacher. She was beloved at the school. I mean, I'm just not, okay. It is very expensive to raise a child with disabilities, and I get that. But when Lance gets released and he's making this like 40 some odd thousand a year, he still has to support himself, right? Because he can't live with Aisha and he can't live at the house that they used to have because that's her house. Anyways, man, the whole thing just leaves a sour taste in your mouth, but that's exactly what happened. And in 9 months, this guy was out back on the street, ordered not to have contact with Aisha, but he does get to have visitation with his girls. They're divorced now. Aisha filed for divorce basically 2 days after the assault took place, and the divorce was finalized while Lance was in prison. She has her own place. The place that they owned together that was in Aisha's name, Aisha started renting to Lynn Mason, the sister of Lance. And that house became sort of the drop-off pickup point for the girls. Lance and Aisha were not supposed to have any communication with each other, so Aisha would bring the girls, drop them off with Lynn. Lance would come and then leave. Aisha would come, drop the girls off with Lynn, and then she would leave, and then Lance would come, pick up the girls, and then leave, and then bring them back, leave. Aisha comes, grab them, and then that way they don't have to ever have any sort of communication with each other. In 2016, while the couple was now divorced and living separately and following this routine of dropping the kids off at Lynn's, picking them up, and avoiding each other altogether, Aisha started a new relationship, a healthy, really good relationship with an old college friend of hers named Ronald Williams. They had been dating and visiting each other, talking on the phone. Ronald lived in Atlanta, and she lived in Cleveland, Shaker Heights, of course. But eventually, things got really serious, and Ronald wanted to come and live with Aisha in Shaker Heights. It wasn't just the proximity that Ronald really wanted, though. He knew how scared Aisha was of her ex-husband, Lance. And he felt that she wasn't being protected in Shaker Heights because of who Lance was, because of his connections to Congress people, judges, and lawyers. It just didn't feel like Aisha was a priority. It felt like Lance was. Aisha had also been confiding in Ronald, letting him know just how scared she was of Lance and how she feared that he might try to do something again. She must have sensed that things on Lance's end were escalating because this is going to end in a horribly violent display, despite the facade that he was continuing to put on. He was getting glowing reviews from the people who were supervising his visits with children. He was continuing to get character references from people who had supported him in the past. But Aisha felt that even though this was going on, even though they had fallen into routine, that Lance hadn't really changed. And that must have been because of some interactions they were having or some sort of gut instinct, because she was absolutely right. And all of this culminated in her murder in November. November 17th, Aisha did what she was always supposed to do, which was take her kids to Lynn's home so that they could spend time with their father. That same day at around 9:30 a.m., Officer Adam Flint of the Shaker Heights Police Department was coming to the end of a pretty long roll call, and he was looking forward to his shift being over. But he heard a call on the radio, and he could tell by the dispatcher's voice that this was not really a typical call. And when dispatch went on to explain what the call was about, he knew for sure that this was not a typical situation at all. Someone had brought in treats for them to enjoy downstairs, and he was just enjoying some coffee and donuts. As stereotypical as it may sound, apparently it wasn't something that happened all the time at the Shaker Heights Police Department, but that day somebody brought in a special treat. So he was downstairs enjoying some coffee and donuts when that call came in. He dropped what he was doing and ran upstairs, got in his car, put on the sirens, and started making his way down to Normandy and Chagrin, where Lisa's home that is rented by Lynn Mason is. When he got there, he parked his car, stepped outside, put his left foot on the ground, rested his right foot in the car where the driver's side seat is, and then has the car door to protect him. He's looking around, scanning the area, trying to get a sense of the scene, when all of a sudden, the breath is just knocked out of him and he is feeling excruciating pain coming from his legs. He had been hit by a car. He turns around to see the car speeding away. Airbags in the car are deploying and there's smoke coming out of it, and he can tell it's probably from that car having collided with his police cruiser. Officer Flint crawls away to freedom and then gets taken into an ambulance to the hospital. The person who hit him with their car was Lance Mason, and he was driving away so fast because he had just finished murdering his ex-wife and mother of his 2 children, Aisha Frazier. That morning, when Aisha dropped off the kids, just like she was supposed to, she was under the impression that her and Lance would be following the arrangement that they had made. Aisha drops the kids off and leaves. Lance comes in after, picks the kids up, and then goes on his way. And that way, the two don't have to interact. But that day, when she got there, Lance was waiting. She parked her car, she got out, and she started getting the girls out of the car. And as they're walking towards the door, Lance sees her through the screen door. He's inside the house in the living room, and he's been waiting for Aisha to show up. Inside the house is his sister Lynn and his sister's daughter, his niece, a 12-year-old girl who we'll just call SG. Lynn probably didn't know what Lance was planning when he came there. She was one of the people who came out as a character witness for Lance when he first went away to prison, saying that she didn't know her brother to be a violent person. So it's possible that she thought that he really wanted to talk to Aisha, and maybe that's why she allowed him to stay there without giving Aisha any sort of heads up that Lance would be there when she got there. So he sees Aisha through the screen door, and he wastes no time. He doesn't care that his sister's there, that her kid is there, that both of his children are in full view. He starts to unleash on Aisha with fists and with knives that he took from the kitchen. He stabbed her multiple times. Lynn Mason gathered up the kids, her daughter and Aisha's girls, and brought them inside to hide. She called the police in a hushed voice and said, "My brother is attacking his ex-wife. Please come." She sounds terrified, like she's trying to not be noticed by Lance. And in the background, you can hear Aisha screaming, saying, "No, please stop. You don't have to do this," while Lance repeatedly stabs and punches her. That carries on for a while, and when Lance is convinced that Aisha's dead, he comes inside and starts pacing around the house. The living room, which is at the front of the house, to the kitchen, and down the hallway. While he's pacing around, he's saying sorry to his sister. You can hear this because Lynn is still on the phone with 911. It's not clear if Lance knows that Lynn called 911 or if he's just in some sort of dissociative, mad state at this point. But when he starts talking to his sister, she is terrified. He comes back inside and he just says to her in a flat voice, "She's dead." And Lynn's voice on the phone to the police goes from hushed fear to just hushed emptiness. She sounds completely in shock about what happened and just doesn't know what to do. Her brother is there, covered in blood, his ex-wife's blood. She heard everything happen. So did the girls. Audrey is non-vocal, so she can't say anything. But Ava is screaming, "Daddy's hurting mommy. I don't think she's alive." When the police showed up and took their positions outside, Lance had already been pacing around the house and in and out of the house. And when he saw the sirens coming, he wanted to try to get away. He jumped in Aisha's car, an Audi SUV, and just blindly pulled out of the driveway and tried to gun it. And that's when he hit Officer Adam Flint's car, hurting him and sending him to the hospital. The car crashes again, airbags are deployed, and then once again, Lance jumps out of the car and back into the home where Lynn and the girls are. And he just waits in there to be arrested. The police find Aisha laying lifeless on the doorstep, and it's pretty obvious that she's deceased, but ambulance do come and do their best, but it's too late. Inside, Lance goes without a struggle, covered in blood, cuffed behind his back, and led into a squad car. At his sentencing, Aisha's mother spoke. She talked about how heartbreaking it was to go all of those years knowing that her daughter was living in fear. She talked about how Lance, when they were separated, would demand that Aisha bring his girls to an ice cream shop late at night, every single night, out of her way so that he could kiss them goodnight. She talked about the intimidation he used by bringing all of the weapons into their house as a show of dominance and strength and whatever. Her father, by that time, was in a home and was unable to make it to the hearing and has since passed away. Aisha was so sure that Lance was going to do something horrible to her and probably end her life. And she was so sure that this was going to happen that she had made plans in advance to have her kids taken care of. She reached out to a very close friend of hers, Stacy, who she had known for 35 years. And she had asked Stacy years back to please be the godmother to Audrey and Ava in the event something ever happened to her. She wanted to know that her girls would go to her, knowing that her parents were up there in age and probably wouldn't be able to be up to the task, and not wanting to leave the girls to Lance or his family. Stacy and her husband agreed, went to church, performed the ceremony, and took on the role and took it seriously. And in 2018, when they got the news that Aisha was murdered, Stacy was half expecting it because Aisha told her to be expecting it. Stacy's own children had graduated university by this point. So in addition to ending his wife's life, ruining the life of Officer Adam Flint, he also set this couple back, Stacy and Mike, years, from whenever they thought they might be able to retire or do anything, and to now raise 2 new children. Not that this was a burden, not that like Stacy and Mike considered this a burden. I'm just thinking, if your kids are already graduating university or college or university, you're probably thinking, you're in that time in your life where, you're going to wind down and maybe travel with your spouse, do things for you. You're not really thinking that you're going to be in a position where all of a sudden there's another 15, 20 years of child rearing facing you. So much about this story is devastating because it feels like it was probably preventable. When you have a man like Lance Mason, who is so well connected in his community, so well loved by people who are in power, people who have the ability to affect the justice system, to circumvent real justice What did that mean for Aisha? Probably that she didn't have a chance. Probably that people weren't as interested in saving her life as they were in rehabilitating the image of Lance Mason. And in the end, because of this constant enablement by those around him, by the justice system, by his family, he was able to carry out what I believe was a plan that he put into place when he realized that he was no longer going to be able to control every facet of Aisha's life. When it came time to sentencing Lance for the murder of his ex-wife, the Shaker Heights justice system decided that was a time to deliver one last insult to injury. The punishment that was on the table at the time was life in prison without the possibility of parole. And based on the fact that this guy had already been given a second chance, that's what a lot of people expected would be the ruling. Even Lance's defense attorneys really thought that life without parole was what he was going to get, and begged the judge to at least consider maybe giving this guy a chance after 40 or 50 years behind bars, so that he may sit in prison with a small hope that he'll see the outside again. Instead of delivering the right sentence, life without parole, because you had a second chance already and this is what you did with it, and instead of just giving the defense exactly what they wanted and perhaps parole after 40 or 50 years, the judge gave Lance 35 years with the possibility of parole afterwards. After 35 years, his kids are going to be in their mid to late 40s with established lives, hopefully, maybe families of their own, and their whole life is going to be upended because they will have to force themselves to confront a decision about what to do when your mother's killer is potentially released from prison. Do you go to that parole hearing and speak against your dad? Do you hope that things just work out and you don't have to see him? Do you want to see him? Do you feel bad about it? Why put that on the table? Why continue to allow this guy who has been given every chance and then some to have a negative impact on so many people's lives? He had every opportunity to be a good dad to Audrey and Ava. He had every opportunity when he got a second chance to remake himself. I really believe that in 2014, when he left Aisha on the road after beating her viciously in that car, that he was leaving her to die. Because how can you deliver a beating like that to somebody and expect them to live? And so this guy must have felt like he had won the lottery when he found out that she was alive and that he was only going to do 2 years. So what do you do with that chance? What do you do with this? If you are truly remorseful, if you're truly regretful and you're like, I wish I had never done this, and now you get this new opportunity, a very short stay in prison, an even shorter stay due to parole, and then getting a job bestowed on you by the freaking mayor as some sort of business development administrator, what do you do with those chances? What people would give for those chances? And Lance used that time to just stew in his own self-pity. Mad that he wasn't going to be a judge anymore, mad that he was facing the consequences of his own actions, and devised a plan to do even more. The nerve of his defense team to even ask for the 40 to 50. I mean, it's their job. But the judge, it's mind-boggling what they must have been thinking, delivering a sentence like this after that woman, that beautiful mother and community leader, was already disrespected in 2014 when you guys didn't put him away properly. I don't know. Thank you for tuning in. Please enjoy this visual palate cleanser of my dog chasing bubbles in the park while we hear from this week's sponsors. Thank you for tuning in to Bread in Captivity. This episode is brought to you by a rolled up $5 bill I found in the dryer, in conjunction with a kind-hearted Toronto Transit employee who let me on the bus after my fare card declined. Additional funding provided by the continued generosity of Costco sampling policy. See you here again next week. Until then, stay safe.